He's the Director for European Affairs and Policy Advising at the European Christian Political Movement, ECPM. We organized many events with Leo in the Romanian Parliament, and I'm very, very pleased that he could join us today. And I invite him, and I want to mention that as we are a little late, maybe we can stick to the minutes we know that we have for our interventions. Leo, you have the floor.
Thank you for your introduction, and it is an honor for me to participate in this important event. And first of all, I congratulate Deputy Mr. Tulver and the Parliamentary Working Group to continuously put the fight against human trafficking on the agenda. I'm happy to address you about two topics. First, the consequence of the COVID pandemic, and about reintegration of the human trafficking survivors. Maybe we can start with the slideshow. Yes. Yes. During the coronavirus, two worrying trends has been observed. First, a spike in pornography, which affects the demand for women and men used in sex trafficking and sex services. Secondly, the enforced quarantine, curfews, lockdowns, travel restrictions, and limitations on public life can make identifying victims even more difficult. Partially related to this, there have been alarms raised over a rise in domestic violence, and its victims remained unidentified as we all stay behind closed doors these days. According to the third report on the implementation of the 2011 Anti-Trafficking Directive, more than 14,000 victims of human trafficking have been recorded in the EU in 2017-2018. Nearly 75% of all victims were women and children, sexual exploitation being one of the main purposes behind trafficking, 2/3. The real number of the victim is most likely higher, as many victims remained undetected. Even though this report is 2017-2018, every year the numbers increase. So we can conclude that this year the numbers could be even higher. The top 5 EU countries as regards citizenship of trafficking victims by absolute numbers were Romania, Hungary, France, the Netherlands, and Bulgaria. In Romania, there is a 16% increase in the number of victims of human trafficking registered in the first part of 2020 compared to the same period last year, according to the ANE-ITP. In the Netherlands, where I come from, there is currently a big discussion about the effects of 20 years of legalization of prostitution. The consensus is that this law did not meet the expectations. The persons active in prostitution have not been sufficiently protected, prosecution of traffickers continue to be low, and the number of victims of sex trafficking continues to be high. Therefore, the Dutch government proposed a new law that aims to better regulate the sex industry. In this bill, the operation of a sex business without a national license is punishable by law. In addition, clients and facilitators of prostitution are punished if they make use of unregistered illegal prostitution or if they are facilitating this. The ECPM is in close contact and collaborates with its members in the Dutch Chamber of Deputies on these issues. Although the step is in the right direction, it is not enough. A real effective battle against sexual exploitation is only possible if the client is fully held responsible and the purchase of the sexual services is criminalized, which what is called the Nordic model. Another point of concern we are focused on is the reintegration of human trafficking survivors and persons trapped in prostitution. Therefore, a pilot project has been tabled in the Gender Equality and Women's Rights, the FEM Committee, in the European Parliament. The pilot project aims to gain more insight into what the best approaches are in supporting the reintegration of survivors of human trafficking. Next slide. It will also try to highlight how the European Union could support reintegration. It focused on research on the organizations that are involved in the reintegration projects, brainstorm sessions with NGOs in different member states, organizing roundtable discussions with representatives of NGOs, institutions, governmental representatives and politicians in the member states, drafting a report with conclusions and recommendations on how to implement this and steps to be taken. The European Commission declined to take this project on, claiming it covered under the International Security Fund, but we are glad that the FEM committee took it on, and in the end, it got adopted as an amendment by the Budget Committee in the European Parliament. The support for the reintegration of persons active in prostitution or human trafficking survivors is even more important because of the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many Romanian girls who were active in the prostitution in, for example, the Netherlands are coming back to Romania. Besides, the most vulnerable women are those who, with a lower level of education, no qualification, or with little work experience. Traffickers exploit these economic vulnerabilities caused by the pandemic. If there is not a robust system in place for these vulnerable women, we are expecting a growth of women ending up in the sex industry in West Europe. In October 2019, there was an anti-trafficking conference in Oradea, followed up in February 2020 by several roundtables in Romania and the Netherlands. At these meetings, representatives of various NGOs shared experiences and brainstormed about alternatives that could be offered to victims of sex trafficking towards a good socio-economic integration. The Dutch government has funded and introduced a few years ago a special exit program for persons who were active in prostitution. It was beneficial to learn also from their experiences. I would like to finish my presentation with a few recommendations that came out of these meetings in Romania, which I think in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic are more needed than ever. Next slide. A better collaboration, communication and coordination amongst the various NGOs active in this field, especially regarding prevention and integration, and also between the NGOs and the government agency, as mentioned by Mrs. Bauer from Eliberare as well. The reintegrated approach of the exit programs in the Netherlands could be a good model. Churches could also get involved, as also mentioned by the British ambassador today. Destigmatization of victims and survivors. There is a great prejudice and discrimination towards women who were caught in sex trafficking or prostitution. Most of the time it was not a choice, but they were forced, or their vulnerabilities were exploited. As we don't know the story behind many of such lives, let us not be quick to put the prostitute label on anyone. Raising awareness about these labels, but referring to them as victim or survivors of human trafficking can make a big difference. Thirdly, an increase in support of all kinds. Financial, for example, freezing the fines a person got while active in the sex industry when this person follows an integration program. And maybe renaming, reclassifying the category of the fine so that it does not say the word prostitution. The fines could even be forgiven maybe in cases when the victim successfully completed a reintegration program. Also, when a trafficker is convicted, his victim should be immediately and automatically provided with restitution. Victims should not have to pursue to get the compensation, but maybe an idea is a governmental fund for setting up for this. Further, a victim needs psychological counseling, employment, education, and housing. Besides, the organization to these roundtables mentioned the need for training law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, and politicians in victim-centered approach in order to avoid re-victimization by treating her as a criminal or by using derogatory language or shaming the survivor. In the definition of human trafficking, it is mentioned exploitation of vulnerability as a means that leads to trafficking. Authorities can be maybe more trained in recognizing these vulnerabilities and counteracting them. Case procedures could maybe also be shortened to facilitate the victim's ability to move forward and to receive justice. These are my recommendations I learned in the past year speaking to various institutions, NGOs, and people involved in fighting human trafficking. I'm looking forward to our continuing collaboration with the Working Group for the Fight Against Human Trafficking for improving the reintegration of persons trapped in prostitution and human trafficking.
Thank you very, very much, Leo van Doesburg, for your friendship and for working together for so many years.